The fluorescent lights above the hospital break room buzzed like dying insects, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that made even the healthiest person look corpse pale. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of my locker, trying to will away the exhaustion that had settled into my bones like concrete. 12 hours. 12 hours of changing bedpans, dodging groping hands from delirious patients, and pretending I didn't notice how the other nurses whispered about my secondhand scrubs and the holes in my sneakers. My stomach growled, a hollow, angry sound that reminded me I'd skipped lunch again. The vending machine sandwich I'd been eyeing cost $4. $4 I didn't have after paying for Emma's daycare and the overdue electric bill. I counted the crumpled bills in my pocket for the third time, hoping somehow they'd multiply. $2.37. Not even enough for the stale crackers. Another double shift, Sophia. Marcus, one of the security guards, poked his head into the break room. His kind eyes held that mixture of pity and concern that I'd grown to hate. You look dead on your feet. I forced a smile, the same one I'd perfected over the past 2 years. Bright enough to deflect questions, tired enough to discourage conversation. Bills don't pay themselves, he frowned, and I could see the offer forming on his lips. Marcus had offered to lend me money before, and each time, the humiliation burned worse than hunger. I grabbed my purse and pushed past him before he could voice it. See you tomorrow, I mumbled, practically fleeing toward the elevator. The hospital lobby at 2 a.m. was a different world. Gone were the frantic families and crying children of daytime chaos. Now it belonged to the night shift workers, the insomniacs, and the people who existed in society's shadows. My footsteps echoed against the polished floors as I made my way to the exit, each click of my worn heels a reminder of how alone I was in this marble and glass cathedral of suffering. Outside, Chicago's October wind cut through my thin jacket like a blade. I pulled it tighter around myself, knowing it was useless. The fabric was so worn it might as well have been paper. The bus stop was a 10-minute walk, and at this hour, I'd be lucky if the next one came within 30 minutes. By the time I got home, I'd have maybe 4 hours to sleep before Emma's babysitter dropped her off, and I had to pretend to be a competent mother again. The parking garage adjacent to the hospital was mostly empty, save for a few expensive cars belonging to the doctors who could afford covered parking. I took the shortcut through it, my steps quick but quiet. Something about the shadows between the concrete pillars always made my skin crawl, but it saved me 5 minutes, and those 5 minutes meant everything when you were this tired. That's when I saw it. The car. Even in the dim lighting, it was impossible to miss. A black Bentley, sleek and predatory, parked in a spot clearly marked for compact vehicles. It stuck out among the beat-up Honda Civics and Toyota Corollas, like a shark among goldfish. The chrome gleamed despite the poor lighting, and I could smell leather and expensive cologne wafting through the slightly open driver's window. Rich people. They parked wherever they wanted, bought whatever they wanted, took whatever they wanted. Like David, Emma's father, who'd promised me the world and then vanished the moment he saw 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, who'd emptied our joint savings account and left me with nothing but an eviction notice and a growing belly. The anger that had been simmering under my exhaustion suddenly flared hot and bright. Before I could think better of it, I found myself standing next to the Bentley's passenger side. The window was down just enough to reveal an interior that probably cost more than I made in a year. Cream leather seats, a dashboard that looked like something from a spaceship, and resting in the cup holder, a gold watch that caught the light like a tiny sun, a Rolex. I didn't know much about expensive things, but I knew enough to recognize that particular status symbol. How many months of rent could that watch pay? How many grocery bills? How many nights could Emma sleep with the heat on instead of huddled under every blanket we owned? The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive and, mostly, sane for the past 2 years, screamed at me to walk away. But exhaustion and desperation make people do stupid things. Before I could stop myself, my hand was reaching through the gap in the window. The watch was heavier than I'd expected, solid gold warm against my palm. For a moment, I just held it, marveling at the weight of so much money in such a small object. The face was black with silver numbers, and the second hand moved with the smooth precision that only came with Swiss engineering and a price tag higher than my annual income. Having second thoughts, the voice came from directly behind me, low and calm and absolutely terrifying in its quietness. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the watch, my heart slamming against my ribs hard enough to hurt. He was tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes even from several feet away. Dark hair, almost black, was styled in that effortlessly perfect way that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. His face was sharp angles and smooth skin, the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers or movie screens. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Pale blue, almost gray, and completely unreadable. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body, the fabric so perfect it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No tie, but his white shirt was open at the collar just enough to reveal the edge of what looked like a tattoo. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his Italian leather shoes to the way he held himself, like he owned not just the car, not just the parking garage, but the entire world around him. The word came out as barely a whisper. My throat had gone completely dry. He took a step closer, and I caught his scent. Cedar and mint and something darker. Something that made my pulse race for reasons I didn't want to examine. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator, all controlled power and lethal elegance. "That's mine," he said, nodding toward the watch still clutched in my trembling hand. His voice carried just the faintest trace of an accent. Italian, maybe, or Eastern European. Whatever it was, it made every word sound like a caress and a threat all at once. "I'm sorry," I managed, extending the watch toward him with a shaking hand. I didn't mean, but I had meant to. I had absolutely meant to steal his watch, and we both knew it. The lie died in my throat as those pale eyes studied my face with an intensity that made me feel like he could see straight through to my soul. He didn't take the watch immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, a movement so smooth and casual that it took my brain a moment to register that he might be reaching for a weapon. My body went rigid with terror, every survival instinct I possessed screaming at me to run. What he pulled out wasn't a gun, it was a phone, sleek, expensive, and definitely not the kind you could buy at a corner store. He glanced at the screen, and for just a moment, his perfectly composed expression shifted into something harder, colder. "Marco," he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving mine. "We have a situation in the parking garage. Level 2, east side." A pause. "No, I'll handle it." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his jacket, all while maintaining that unnerving eye contact. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension and unspoken threats. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the rumble of car engines and the clack of high heels on concrete, but it all felt muffled and far away, like we were trapped in our own private bubble of terror. "What's your name?" he asked. I opened my mouth to lie, to give him a fake name, and pray he'd let me disappear into the Chicago night, but something in his expression stopped me. This wasn't a man you lied to. This was a man who probably had people killed for smaller offenses than attempted theft. "Sophia," I whispered. "Sophia." He repeated my name slowly, like he was tasting it. "Sophia, who works the night shift at Chicago General. Sophia, who takes the bus home to a studio apartment in Pilsen. Sophia, who has a 2-year-old daughter named Emma." My blood turned to ice water. How could he possibly know all that? I'd never seen this man before in my life. I was sure of it. A face like his wasn't something you forgot. "How do you—" I started, but he held up one elegant hand, silencing me immediately. "The question isn't how I know," he said, taking another step closer. Now I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the gold flecks in his pale eyes. "The question is what I'm going to do about it." Footsteps echoed through the garage, multiple sets, moving fast and purposeful. His backup was coming, and something told me that once they arrived, my chances of walking out of this parking garage alive would drop to 0. "Please," I whispered, hating how broken I sounded. "I have a daughter. She needs me. I'll do anything." "Anything?" The word was barely more than a breath, but it hit me like a physical blow. The way he said it, the way his eyes darkened, I suddenly understood that I'd stumbled into something much more dangerous than simple theft. The watch felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. I held it out again, desperate now. Just take it back. Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This time, he did take it. But instead of simply grabbing it, he wrapped his fingers around mine, his skin warm and surprisingly soft. The contact sent electricity shooting up my arm, and I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping. Keep it, he said quietly. What? I blinked up at him, certain I'd misheard. I said keep it. He released my hand but didn't step back. Consider it a loan. I have a feeling you're going to need it. The footsteps were getting closer now. At least 3 people, maybe more. Heavy boots against concrete. The sound of safety catches being released. I don't understand, I said, clutching the watch against my chest like a lifeline. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his lips, but there was no warmth in it. You will. The first of his men rounded the corner. A mountain of a man in an expensive suit, his hand resting on something concealed beneath his jacket. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows, all of them moving with the same predatory grace as their boss. Mr. Marchetti, the first man said, his voice respectful but tense. Is there a problem? Marchetti. Even I recognized that name. The Marchetti family had been Chicago's most powerful crime organization for 3 generations. They owned half the city's politicians and all of its fear, and I had just tried to steal from... No problem, Vincent, Marchetti said without turning around. Just a misunderstanding. But his eyes were still locked on mine, and I could see something calculating there, something that made my skin crawl with dread. This wasn't over. Whatever had just happened between us, it was only the beginning. Get in, he said suddenly, nodding toward the Bentley. What? The word came out as a squeak. The car. Get in. When I didn't move, frozen by terror and confusion, his voice hardened just slightly. It wasn't a request. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead weights. The 3 men behind Marchetti had fanned out, blocking any escape route I might have considered. Their faces were stone masks of professional indifference, but their hands remained close to their weapons. I was trapped, and we all knew it. I can't, I stammered, backing up until the cold metal of the Bentley pressed against my spine. I have to get home. Emma's babysitter is being paid for the entire night, Marchetti interrupted smoothly. I've already taken care of it. The casual way he said it, like rearranging my life, was as simple as ordering coffee, sent ice water through my veins. How long had he been watching me? How much did he know about my pathetic existence? You've been what? My voice cracked on the last word. Instead of answering, he moved to the passenger door and opened it with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The interior light illuminated cream leather seats that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. The scent that wafted out was intoxicating. Expensive leather, subtle cologne, and something else. Something dangerous. Sophia. My name on his lips sounded like both a caress and a warning. Get in the car. I looked desperately at the exit, calculating distances and odds. Vincent, the mountain of a man, caught my gaze and shook his head almost imperceptibly. The message was clear. Don't even think about it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the watch I still clutched against my chest. The gold was warm now, heated by my panicked body temperature. Such a small thing to have destroyed my life over. Where are you taking me? I whispered. For the first time since this nightmare began, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across Marchetti's face. It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. But for just a moment, he looked almost apologetic. Somewhere safe, he said quietly. I give you my word. No harm will come to you tonight. The word of a Mafia boss. How much was that worth? But what choice did I have? I could feel the weight of his men's stares, the implicit threat in their stillness. This wasn't really a request, no matter how politely it was phrased. My legs felt like jelly as I approached the open door. The interior of the Bentley was even more intimidating up close. All gleaming surfaces and soft leather that probably cost more per square inch than my monthly rent. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather enveloping me like an expensive embrace. Marchetti closed the door with a soft click, that sounded like a prison cell locking. Through the tinted windows, I watched his men disperse with military precision, disappearing into the shadows as if they'd never existed at all. Only Vincent remained, sliding behind the wheel of a black SUV that had materialized from nowhere. The driver's door opened, and Marchetti settled beside me with that same fluid grace. Up close, in the confined space of the car, his presence was overwhelming. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that intoxicating combination of cedar and mint and danger. When he reached across me to retrieve something from the glove compartment, his arm brushed against mine, and I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping at the electric contact. What he pulled out was a bottle of water and a small tin of mints. He opened the water and handed it to me without a word. I stared at it stupidly for a moment before my parched throat reminded me that I hadn't had anything to drink since my coffee break 6 hours ago. The water was cold and pure, better than anything that came from my apartment's rusty tap. I drank greedily, not caring how desperate I looked. When I finally came up for air, I found him watching me with those unreadable pale eyes. "Better?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The engine purred to life, a sound so smooth and powerful, it was barely audible. We pulled out of the parking garage into the Chicago night, the SUV following at a discreet distance. For several blocks, we drove in silence. The city looked different from inside a car like this. Cleaner somehow, more distant. The homeless people on street corners, the broken streetlights, the graffiti tags that marked territory in the war between rival gangs. It all seemed like someone else's problem when viewed through bulletproof glass. "You're wondering why," Marchetti said suddenly, his voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts. I turned to look at him, studying his profile in the glow of passing streetlights. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, and there was a small scar just above his left eyebrow that somehow made him even more dangerously attractive. "Why what?" I managed. "Why I'm not having you arrested. Why I gave you the watch instead of taking it back. Why you're sitting in my car instead of a police station." All excellent questions, none of which I was sure I wanted answered. "Your daughter," he continued when I didn't respond. "Emma. She's 2 years old. Blonde hair, green eyes, likes strawberry ice cream and bedtime stories about princesses." My heart stopped. Actually stopped. For what felt like an eternity, before slamming back to life at double speed. "How do you—" I started, but he held up a hand. "Her father is David Chen," he said, and now his voice carried a hint of ice. "Former accountant for several of my business interests. Former because he made the mistake of thinking he could steal from me." The world tilted sideways. David had worked for the mob? My David. The man who'd sworn he loved me, who'd promised we'd build a life together, had been laundering money for the Marchetti family? "That's impossible," I whispered. David worked for a consulting firm, Morrison and Associates. I saw his office, met his co-workers. "A front," Marchetti said simply. "Morrison and Associates provides accounting services for several legitimate businesses. It also provides other services for less legitimate ones." I felt like I was drowning in revelation. Everything I'd thought I knew about the father of my child was a lie. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the way Marchetti was looking at me now, like I was a puzzle piece he'd finally figured out how to place. "David stole from you," I said slowly, pieces clicking together in my mind. "And now you think I'm involved somehow, are you?" The question was soft, almost gentle, but I could hear the steel underneath. This was a test, and my life probably depended on passing it. "No," I said, meeting his gaze steadily despite my terror. "I didn't even know he worked for you. When Emma was born, he disappeared, cleaned out our bank account and vanished. I haven't seen him since." We'd stopped at a red light, and Marchetti turned to study my face with an intensity that made me want to shrink into the leather seat. His pale eyes seemed to catalog every micro-expression, searching for lies or deception. $700,000, he said finally. "That's what he took from me. 700,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd been struggling to pay for Emma's formula while the father of my child had been sitting on enough money to change our lives forever. "I don't have it," I said quickly. "Whatever he stole, I don't have any of it. I'm a broke single mother who works double shifts just to keep the lights on." If I had $700,000, do you think I'd be trying to steal watches in parking garages? Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Fair point. The light turned green, and we continued through the city. I was completely lost now, with no idea which direction we were heading. The buildings outside were getting nicer, more expensive. We'd left my neighborhood far behind. So what now? I asked. If you don't think I have the money, why am I here? Instead of answering, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. The screen displayed a text message, and even upside down, I could see it was a photo. A photo of me walking out of the hospital just an hour ago. I've been watching you for 3 weeks, he said calmly, as if he was discussing the weather. Learning your routines, your habits, your strengths and weaknesses. The violation of it hit me like a slap. You've been stalking me. I've been investigating you, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He glanced at me, and for just a moment, something almost like approval crossed his features. You have more spine than I expected. I didn't feel like I had spine. I felt like I was one wrong word away from a complete breakdown, but terror has a way of crystallizing things, of burning away everything except the essential truth. And the truth was that I was already living in hell, working myself to death for scraps, watching my daughter grow up in poverty, knowing that one medical emergency or missed shift could destroy the fragile life I'd built for us. What do you want from me? I asked. We turned into an underground parking garage beneath a gleaming high-rise that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The elevator that carried us to the penthouse was made of glass and gold, rising through the building's core like a gilded cage. His penthouse was a study in expensive minimalism, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and enough space to house 3 families like mine. But despite its obvious luxury, there was something cold about it, something that spoke of a man who owned everything but belonged nowhere. Sit, he said, gesturing toward a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than my car. I perched on the edge, afraid to lean back and leave impressions in the pristine fabric. He moved to a bar cart and poured 2 glasses of something amber and expensive-looking. When he handed one to me, our fingers brushed again, and that same electric shock raced up my arm. I don't drink, I said automatically. Tonight you do. I took a small sip and immediately regretted it. The alcohol burned down my throat like liquid fire, but there was something smoky and complex underneath the burn, probably a whiskey that cost more than my monthly salary. David Chen cost me more than money, Marchetti said, settling into the chair across from me. He cost me reputation, trust. In my world, those things are more valuable than cash. I took another sip, larger this time, hoping it would calm my nerves. It didn't. If anything, the warmth spreading through my chest made me more aware of how surreal this situation was. I still don't understand what this has to do with me, I said. David has surfaced, he said quietly. 3 days ago, my people spotted him in Miami. He's been living quite well on my money. Penthouse apartment, expensive cars, a new identity, but apparently he's gotten greedy, stupid. He's planning to sell information about my operations to a competitor. The glass slipped in my suddenly nerveless fingers. I caught it just before it fell, whiskey sloshing against the sides. He's putting my entire organization at risk, Marchetti continued. My family, my people. That's something I cannot allow. So kill him, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Isn't that what people like you do? His laugh was soft and completely without humor. People like me? I flushed, realizing how that had sounded. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. And you're not wrong. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, closing the distance between us. But killing David Chen won't get my money back. It won't undo the damage to my reputation. And it won't send the message I need to send. The whiskey was making me bold, or maybe it was just exhaustion finally overriding fear. What message is that? That stealing from Luca Marchetti has consequences that extend beyond the grave, he said, and the quiet certainty in his voice made my blood run cold. That betraying me doesn't just cost you your life. It costs you everything you care about. Understanding hit me like a freight train. Emma, "Your daughter is beautiful," he said softly. "Innocent. She doesn't deserve to pay for her father's sins." "Don't you dare!" I started to rise, but he held up a hand. "I'm not threatening her," he said firmly. "I'm protecting her. You both." "From what?" "From the people David has chosen to do business with. The kind of people who would use a child to make a point." I sank back into the sofa, my mind reeling. First, I'd learned that Emma's father was a criminal. Now I was being told that she was in danger from other criminals. How had my simple life become so complicated so quickly? "What do you want from me?" I asked again, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Luca Marchetti, I could think of him by his first name now somehow, set down his glass and fixed me with those pale, hypnotic eyes. "I want you to help me destroy him." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Help him destroy David, the father of my child, the man who had abandoned us, yes, but also the man whose eyes Emma had inherited, whose smile she sometimes wore when she thought no one was looking. "I can't," I whispered, setting the whiskey glass down with trembling hands. "Whatever he did to you, however much he stole, I can't help you hurt him." Luca's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere around us. The air grew thicker, more charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. "Even knowing he's put your daughter in danger?" he asked quietly. "Even knowing that his greed has painted a target on both your backs?" I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the certainty in his voice made my protests die in my throat. He wasn't the type of man who dealt in maybes or possibilities. If he said Emma was in danger, then she was. "Tell me," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. He stood and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette dark against the glittering Chicago skyline. Even in stillness, there was something predatory about him, like a panther that had momentarily paused in its hunt. "David made contact with the Kozlov organization 2 weeks ago," he said, his voice carrying across the vast space of the penthouse. "Russian outfit, new to Chicago but with a reputation for extreme brutality. They've been trying to establish territory here for months." He turned back to face me, and the city lights behind him made him look like some dark angel, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "The information David is selling them would give them detailed knowledge of my operations, my safe houses, my people. In exchange, they're offering him protection and a cut of whatever they can take from me. But that still doesn't explain why Emma and I are involved," I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was being naive. "Kozlov doesn't just want my territory," Luca continued, moving back toward me with that fluid, dangerous grace. "They want to make an example, to show Chicago that the Marchetti family can be brought down. And what better way to humiliate me than to take something precious from David Chen while he watches helplessly?" The implication hit me like ice water. They want to take Emma. Or worse. The words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of absolute conviction. These aren't men who distinguish between adults and children when it comes to sending messages. I felt like I was going to be sick. The expensive whiskey burned in my stomach, mixing with terror and exhaustion to create a toxic cocktail that made the room spin slightly. "How do you know all this?" I asked desperately. "Maybe you're wrong. Maybe because I have people inside their organization," he said simply. "Because surveillance and intelligence are what keep men like me alive. And because 3 days ago they had someone following you home from work." The memory hit me suddenly, the feeling of being watched, the shadow I'd glimpsed from the corner of my eye as I'd unlocked my apartment door. I'd attributed it to exhaustion and paranoia. But now, "You've been protecting us," I realized. Something that might have been surprise flickered across his features. "You sound shocked." "I am. I don't understand why you'd care about some random woman and her child." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note I hadn't heard before, something almost vulnerable beneath the steel. "My sister was 7 when she was killed in the crossfire of a gang war. Innocent. Pure. She was playing in our neighborhood park when bullets started flying." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The men responsible thought they were sending a message to my father. All they did was create a monster." The admission hung between us, raw and painful. I could see the ghosts in his pale eyes now, the shadows of old grief that had shaped him into the dangerous man standing before me. "I'm sorry," I said softly, and meant it. "Don't be sorry," he said, his mask sliding back into place. "Be smart. Help me end this before Emma becomes another casualty in a war she never asked to be part of." I closed my eyes, trying to think through the terror and exhaustion. When I opened them again, he was watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "What would I have to do?" I asked. "Contact him. Tell him you need help, that you've discovered something about his work with my organization, and you're scared." "He won't believe me," I said immediately. "He hasn't tried to contact me once since he left. Why would he care if I was in trouble? Because you're the mother of his child. Because whatever else he is, some part of him must still care about Emma's well-being." I wanted to laugh at his naivety, but the sound that came out was more like a sob. "You don't know David. He cares about David, period. Emma and I were convenient when we served his purposes, disposable when we didn't. For the first time since this nightmare began." Luca looked uncertain. He studied my face like he was reading a map of every hurt David had inflicted. "Then we'll make him care," he said finally. "We'll make him believe that helping you is the only way to protect his own interests." Before I could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted into something harder, more dangerous. "Vincent?" he answered, turning away from me. "What is it?" I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but whatever Vincent was saying made Luca's shoulders tense. When he spoke again, his voice carried a razor's edge of controlled fury. "How many?" A pause. "Casualties?" Another pause, longer this time. "I want every available man on this. Now." He ended the call and stood perfectly still for a moment, his back to me. When he turned around, the man facing me was not the one who had just shared his sister's tragic story. This was the Mafia boss, cold, calculating, absolutely lethal. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Kozlov made his move. 2 hours ago, his men hit one of my warehouses on the south side. His voice was utterly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. 3 of my people are dead. The words hit me like physical blows. 3 people. Dead, because of a war that had started with David's greed. "I have to go," Luca said, already moving toward what I assumed was a bedroom to change clothes. "Vincent will take you home. There will be men watching your building tonight, keeping you and Emma safe." "Wait," I called after him, surprising myself. "The plan, to contact David. Are we still—" He paused in the doorway, looking back at me with those pale, hypnotic eyes. "Tomorrow," he said. "After I've buried my dead and made Kozlov pay for what he's done tonight. Then we'll discuss how to bring your daughter's father home." The way he said it made it clear that David's homecoming would not be a joyful reunion. 20 minutes later, I was back in the Bentley's passenger seat, this time with Vincent behind the wheel. The mountain of a man drove with surprising gentleness, taking corners carefully and avoiding the worst of the city's potholes. But his eyes were constantly moving, checking mirrors, scanning intersections, and I realized he was looking for threats. "Mr. Marchetti is a good man," Vincent said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. I glanced at him in surprise. I didn't know mob bosses had character witnesses. He chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. "He saved my life, my family's life. When my daughter was sick, cancer, he made sure she got the best treatment money could buy. Didn't ask for anything in return. Why are you telling me this? Because you're scared of him. I can see it. But you shouldn't be. Whatever else he is, he protects the people he cares about. He doesn't care about me," I protested. "He barely knows me." Vincent's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "Maybe. But he cares about what's right, and what Kozlov and your ex are planning. It ain't right." We pulled up outside my building, a shabby 3-story walk-up in a neighborhood that gentrification had forgotten. Vincent got out and opened my door, scanning the street with professional paranoia before nodding toward the entrance. "Second floor, apartment 2B, he said, and I realized he already knew exactly where I lived. "My men will be watching. You won't see them, but they're there. The climb to my apartment felt endless. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound could be a threat. When I finally got my key in the lock, my hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's babysitter, was asleep on my couch, the television playing some late-night talk show at low volume. She stirred when I closed the door, blinking in confusion. "Sophia? You're late." I was worried. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing normalcy into my voice. "Work ran over. How was Emma?" "An angel as always. She had her dinner, brushed her teeth, and went down without any fuss." Mrs. Rodriguez gathered her purse and sweater, pausing at the door. "Are you all right, mija? You look pale." "Just tired," I lied. "Thank you for staying so late." After she left, I stood in my tiny living room and tried to process everything that had happened. Just 6 hours ago, my biggest worry had been whether I could afford groceries this week. Now I was caught in the middle of a mob war. My daughter was in danger, and the father of my child was apparently a criminal who'd put us both at risk. Emma's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open carefully. She was sleeping peacefully, her blonde hair spread across her pillow, one small hand clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. She looked so innocent, so perfect. The idea that anyone would want to hurt her made rage burn in my chest alongside the terror. I thought about what Luca had said, that his sister had been 7 when she was killed in gang violence. Emma was only 2. How could anyone look at something so pure and see a weapon to be used? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sleep. Tomorrow we plan. You are both safe tonight." The fact that he had my number shouldn't have surprised me. He seemed to know everything else about my life. But the message itself was oddly comforting. Despite everything he was, despite the violence I knew he was capable of, I believed him. Emma and I were safe tonight. I settled into the chair beside Emma's bed, the same chair I'd sat in through countless nights when she was sick or scared. The Rolex was still in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of how drastically my life had changed. Tomorrow, I would have to make a choice that would determine not just my future, but Emma's as well. Outside, I thought I caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows across the street, one of Luca's men keeping watch. The knowledge should have been terrifying, but instead, it was almost reassuring. For the first time in 2 years, someone else was sharing the burden of keeping my daughter safe. I must have dozed off in the chair, because the next thing I knew, Emma was stirring, making the soft little sounds she always made when she was waking up. Pale morning light was filtering through the thin curtains, and my neck ached from sleeping upright. "Mama?" Emma's voice was soft and sleepy. When she saw me sitting beside her bed, she smiled that radiant smile that made everything else fade away. "You're here." "I'm here, baby," I said, lifting her from her bed and holding her close. She smelled like baby shampoo and innocence, and I felt tears threatening. "Mama's here." As I carried her to the kitchen to make breakfast, my phone buzzed with another text. This time, it was from a number I recognized, David's number, though he'd never used it to contact me before. "We need to talk. Millennium Park, by the fountain, 2 p.m. Come alone." My blood ran cold. How had he known? How could he possibly have found out about last night so quickly? A second text arrived almost immediately, this one from Luca. "Don't respond yet. We need to meet first." I realized with growing dread that the game had already begun, and I was a piece on a board where I didn't even know the rules. Emma was babbling happily over her cereal when the knock came at my door. 3 soft raps followed by 2 harder ones. A code. I froze with the spoon halfway to my mouth, my heart immediately racing. It was barely 8 in the morning, and I wasn't expecting anyone. "Mama scared?" Emma asked, her green eyes, so much like David's, studying my face with that uncanny perception children sometimes possess. "No, baby," I lied, setting down my coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "Mama's just tired." Another knock, this time accompanied by a low voice. "Sophia, it's Marcus, hospital security. I need to talk to you." Marcus? What was he doing here? And how did he know where I lived? I approached the door cautiously, pressing my eye to the peephole. It was definitely Marcus, but something about his posture seemed wrong. He kept glancing over his shoulder, and his usual easy smile was nowhere to be seen. "Marcus, What are you doing here? I called through the door without opening it. There's been an incident at the hospital. Someone broke into the employee records office last night. Your file was one of the ones accessed. He paused, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. Sophia, I think someone's been watching you. My blood turned to ice. Luca had said his people were watching me. But what if Kozlov's men were too? What if last night's warehouse attack had been a diversion while they gathered information about me? I looked back at Emma, who was now finger-painting with her spilled orange juice, completely oblivious to the danger swirling around us. The normalcy of the scene, my daughter making a mess at breakfast, seemed surreal against the backdrop of mob wars and death threats. Just a minute, I called to Marcus, then grabbed my phone and quickly typed a message to Luca. Hospital security here. Says someone broke into records. What do I do? His response came back almost immediately. Let him in. Vincent is already en route. I unlatched the multiple locks I'd installed after David left, a precaution that now seemed laughably inadequate, and opened the door. Marcus stepped inside quickly, his eyes immediately scanning the small apartment with professional thoroughness. Sophia, we need to get you out of here, he said without preamble. The break-in wasn't random. Someone specifically targeted employee files for the night shift nurses. Yours, specifically. How do you know all this? I asked, closing the door behind him but not relocking it. Something about his urgency made me think we might need to leave quickly, because I was working late last night when it happened. I saw the guys on the security cameras. 3 men, professional, knew exactly where to go and what to look for. Marcus's expression was grim. Sophia, these weren't common thieves. They moved like military, like they'd done this kind of thing before. Emma chose that moment to announce loudly, Mama, juice spilled! She was standing in her high chair now, sticky fingers reaching toward me. The innocent interruption was jarring against Marcus's dire warnings. It's okay, baby, I said automatically, moving to lift her from the chair. We'll clean it up. But as I bent to pick up Emma, I noticed Marcus's hand had moved to his jacket, the same place where Luca's men kept their weapons. The gesture was subtle, professional, but it sent alarm bells screaming through my head. Marcus, I said slowly, straightening with Emma in my arms. How did you know where I live? For just a moment, his mask slipped. The concerned expression faltered, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Personnel files, he said, but there was a hesitation that hadn't been there before. Personnel files don't have home addresses for security staff to access, I said, backing toward the kitchen where I'd left my phone. I know because I had to update mine 3 times when I moved, and each time they told me only HR and payroll could see that information. Marcus's hand moved closer to his jacket. Sophia, you need to trust me. I'm trying to help you. Help me what? I demanded, clutching Emma tighter. She could sense my tension and was starting to whimper. Who are you really? Before Marcus could answer, the apartment door exploded inward with a crash that made Emma scream. Vincent filled the doorframe like an avenging angel, his massive form backlit by the hallway fluorescence. Behind him, 2 other men I didn't recognize moved with the same lethal precision. Step away from them, Vincent said, his voice deadly calm. Marcus's hand was fully inside his jacket now, but he hadn't drawn whatever weapon he carried. This doesn't concern you, Marcus said, and now his voice carried a slight accent that definitely wasn't from Chicago. This is between me and the girl. The girl has protection, Vincent replied. Protection you've just violated. Everything happened at once. Marcus lunged toward his weapon. Vincent moved with surprising speed for such a large man, and I dove behind the kitchen counter with Emma, both of us screaming. The sound of bodies slamming into furniture filled the apartment, followed by Emma's terrified wails. Stay down! Vincent shouted over the chaos. There was a crash as someone went through my coffee table, then a sound like a gunshot that made me press Emma's face against my shoulder to muffle her sobs. The fighting seemed to go on forever, but probably lasted less than 30 seconds. When the sounds stopped, I waited another full minute before cautiously peering over the counter. Marcus was on the floor, unconscious or worse, blood seeping from a head wound. Vincent stood over him, breathing hard, but apparently uninjured. The 2 other men were securing the scene, one checking Marcus for weapons while the other examined the damaged door. "Is he dead?" I whispered, still holding Emma, who had quieted to soft hiccups against my neck. "No, but he'll wish he was when he wakes up," Vincent said grimly. He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number. "Boss, we have a problem. Kozlov sent someone posing as hospital security. Yeah, she's safe. Both of them are safe." Emma pulled back to look at me, her green eyes wide and frightened. "Mama scared now?" she asked in her tiny voice. I forced a smile I didn't feel. "No, baby. The scary man is all done now. We're okay." But I wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. My apartment had been invaded, my daughter had witnessed violence, and a man was bleeding on my living room floor. The life I'd tried so hard to build, poor but peaceful, was crumbling around me. "Pack a bag," Vincent said, ending his call. "Mr. Marchetti wants you both moved to a secure location immediately." "I can't just leave," I protested weakly. "I have work. Emma has daycare. You have bigger problems than missing work," Vincent interrupted, but not unkindly. "This was just a scouting mission. Next time, they'll come in force." As if to emphasize his point, one of the other men looked up from searching Marcus and held up a phone. "He was recording everything," he said. "Audio and video, probably transmitting back to his handlers." The implications hit me like a physical blow. They had footage of Emma, of our apartment, of our daily routine. They knew exactly what she looked like now, exactly how to find us. "5 minutes," I said, my voice hollow. "Give me 5 minutes to pack." Emma's diaper bag was always kept ready, a habit from her infancy that had persisted out of necessity. Diapers, wipes, change of clothes, favorite toys, the essentials of keeping a toddler comfortable and distracted. For myself, I threw random clothes into an old gym bag, not really caring what I grabbed. The Rolex was still in yesterday's jeans pocket. I transferred it to today's, the weight both comforting and terrifying. When I emerged from the bedroom, the unconscious man was gone, and Vincent's people had done their best to straighten the destroyed furniture. It looked like a particularly aggressive robbery rather than a mob hit, which I supposed was the point. "Where are we going?" I asked, as Vincent took the diaper bag from my shoulder. "Somewhere safe," he said. The same non-answer Luca had given me the night before. Emma was fascinated by the black SUV waiting outside, trying to touch everything while I strapped her into a car seat that definitely hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. Vincent's efficiency was both impressive and terrifying. "Where did you get the car seat?" I asked as we pulled away from my building. "Mr. Marchetti had it installed this morning," Vincent replied. He thought of everything. The drive took us north, away from my neighborhood and into areas of Chicago I'd only seen in magazines. The buildings grew taller, cleaner, more expensive with each mile. Emma pressed her nose to the window, pointing at everything that caught her attention. "Big building, Mama. Pretty flowers. Doggy." Her innocent wonder was a stark contrast to the armed men in the front seat and the knowledge that we were fleeing for our lives. I tried to memorize her expressions, her excitement at this unexpected adventure, knowing that this might be the last normal moment we'd have for a long time. The SUV pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that looked like it cost more than most people's annual salaries. The elevator that carried us upward was different from the one in Luca's building, still expensive, but warmer somehow, more lived in. When the doors opened, I understood why. This wasn't Luca's stark penthouse. This was someone's home. The apartment was spacious but comfortable, with furniture that looked like it had been chosen for living rather than impressing. Toys were scattered in one corner, and I could smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen. "Sophia!" a woman's voice called out, warm and welcoming despite the circumstances. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and I was struck immediately by her beauty. Dark hair, olive skin, and the same pale blue eyes as Luca. "I'm Isabella, Luca's sister." "Welcome, sister." But Luca had said his sister died when she was 7. Confusion must have shown on my face because Isabella smiled sadly. "Half-sister," she clarified. "Same father, different mothers. I was born after Lucia died." She knelt down to Emma's level, And this beautiful little angel must be Emma. Emma, who was normally shy around strangers, looked up at Isabella with curious interest. "Pretty lady," she announced solemnly. "Very pretty lady," Isabella agreed, holding out her hand. "Would you like to see my kitchen? I was just making cookies." The casual domesticity of the scene, a beautiful woman offering cookies to my daughter, felt surreal after the morning's violence. But Emma's face lit up at the mention of cookies, and she took Isabella's hand without hesitation. "Is this where we're staying?" I asked Vincent, who was checking his phone again. "For now. Mr. Marchetti will be here within the hour to discuss the next steps." As if summoned by his name, I heard the distinctive sound of an elevator arriving. Luca emerged looking like he'd been up all night. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his pale eyes. But when he saw Emma sitting at Isabella's kitchen island, carefully decorating a sugar cookie with intense concentration, something in his expression softened. "How are they?" he asked Vincent quietly. Shaken but unharmed. Marcus, if that's even his real name, had been watching the apartment for at least a week. Kozlov's people know everything about their routine now. Luca's jaw tightened, and I saw that dangerous coldness return to his eyes. And our response to this morning's intrusion? Marcus is being questioned. His handler is receiving a message about the consequences of targeting innocents. The euphemisms were polite, but I understood the reality behind them. People were going to suffer because of what had happened to Emma and me this morning. The thought should have horrified me, but instead, I felt a dark satisfaction. They had threatened my daughter. Whatever happened to them, they had brought on themselves. "Mama, look," Emma called out, holding up her cookie. It was covered in so much frosting and sprinkles that the original sugar cookie was barely visible. But her pride in her creation was radiant. "It's beautiful, baby," I said, meaning it. In a world of violence and danger, my daughter had found joy in decorating a cookie. Her resilience amazed me. Luca approached slowly, like he was afraid of spooking a wild animal. "May I see?" he asked Emma, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. Emma considered this gravely, then held out the cookie for his inspection. "For Mama," she explained seriously. "Mama likes pink. Pink is a good choice," Luca agreed, and I was startled to see genuine warmth in his smile. "Your mama is very lucky to have such a thoughtful daughter." Emma beamed at the praise, then turned back to her decorating with renewed enthusiasm. Luca straightened and looked at me, and I saw the moment when the man who'd smiled at my daughter transformed back into the mob boss who'd orchestrated last night's retaliation. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About David's message, about what comes next." I glanced at Emma, safely occupied with Isabella and her cookies, then nodded. Whatever came next, whatever price had to be paid to keep her safe, I was ready to pay it. Luca led me to a study lined with books that looked like they'd actually been read, not just arranged for show. Through the tall windows, I could see Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, its surface dark and choppy under the gray October sky. He closed the door behind us, and suddenly the cheerful sounds of Emma's laughter seemed very far away. "David's message wasn't random," Luca said without preamble, moving to pour himself what looked like the same expensive whiskey from last night. "My people intercepted communications between him and Kozlov. They know about our meeting last night." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "How is that possible?" "Because David Chen is smarter than I gave him credit for," Luca admitted, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "He's been monitoring my movements, my associates. When you showed up at my penthouse, it triggered every alarm he'd set." The weight of my stupidity crashed over me. "So this is my fault. Emma's in danger because I tried to steal your watch." "No." The word was sharp, absolute. "Emma's in danger because her father chose to steal from me and then compound that theft with betrayal. Nothing you did or didn't do last night would have changed that fundamental fact." He handed me a glass of whiskey, and this time I didn't protest. The burn was familiar now, almost comforting in its intensity. "The message," I said, pulling out my phone to show him David's text again. "Millennium Park at 2 p.m. What does he want?" Luca studied the message, his pale eyes calculating. "To use you as bait. He's going to offer you to Kozlov as proof of his commitment to their partnership." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made my blood run cold. Offer me how? They want to draw me out into the open, make me choose between my reputation and protecting you. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Regret. In their minds, a mafia boss who goes soft over a woman and her child is a mafia boss who can be defeated. And they're right, aren't they? I asked quietly. You are protecting us. You could have just let this play out. Let David and Kozlov destroy each other and stayed clear of the whole mess. Luka was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. My sister, Lucia, the one who died. She would have been about your age now. Sometimes I wonder what kind of woman she would have become, whether she would have had children of her own. He turned back to me, and I saw the ghost of old pain in his eyes. I've spent 15 years making sure no other innocent pays for the sins of men like me. I'm not going to stop now. And the confession hung between us, raw and honest in a way I hadn't expected from someone in his position. I found myself moving closer, drawn by the vulnerability he was showing me. What's the plan? I asked. You're going to meet him, Luka said, his mask sliding back into place, but not alone and not unprepared. Over the next hour, he outlined a strategy that was both elegant and terrifying in its complexity. I would go to Millennium Park as David had requested, but I'd be wearing a wire and surrounded by Luka's people. The goal wasn't just to capture David. It was to use him to get to Kozlov and end this war before it could claim any more innocent lives. What about Emma? I asked when he'd finished explaining the technical details. Emma stays here with Isabella, Luka said firmly. This building is a fortress. She'll be safer here than anywhere else in the city. And after? When this is all over? He studied my face with that intense focus I was beginning to recognize. What do you want to happen after? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of everything I'd been trying not to think about. What did I want? For 2 years, I'd wanted David to come back, to be the father Emma deserved. But that man, if he'd ever really existed, was gone. The man who had sent that text was a stranger, someone who would use his own child as a weapon. I want Emma to be safe, I said finally. I want her to grow up without fear, without having to look over her shoulder or wonder if the next knock on the door will bring violence into her world. And for yourself? The question was asked so quietly I almost missed it, but when I looked up, I found Luka watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something there, interest perhaps, or something deeper, something that made my pulse quicken despite everything else that was happening. I don't know, I admitted. I've been surviving for so long, I forgot what it felt like to actually live. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his pale blue eyes. You could stay, he said softly. After this is over, you and Emma. You'd be protected, provided for. She could grow up safe. The offer hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. As what? Your mistress? Your charity case? As whatever you want to be. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone capable of such violence. I'm not David Chen, Sophia. I don't make promises I can't keep. For a moment, I'd let myself imagine it. A life without constant fear, without counting every penny, without wondering if this would be the month we couldn't make rent. Emma growing up in safety, surrounded by books and toys and all the opportunities money could provide. It was tempting, dangerously so, but it was also a cage, no matter how gilded. Ask me again when this is over, I said, stepping back from his touch, when I'm not terrified and desperate and grateful for any offer of safety. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Fair enough. At 1:30 p.m., I was back in the Bentley, this time wearing a wire so small and sophisticated that it was completely invisible beneath my clothes. Vincent was driving, with 2 other cars full of Luka's people following at discreet distances. The plan was simple in theory. Get David talking, get him to implicate himself and reveal Kozlov's location, then let Luka's people handle the rest. Millennium Park was busy despite the gray weather. Tourists taking pictures, joggers following the lakefront path, families with children enjoying the autumn afternoon. It all looked so normal, so innocent. No one would have guessed that they were about to witness the endgame of a war that had been building for weeks. David was waiting by the crown fountain, just as he'd specified. Even from a distance, I could see he'd changed. Gone was the slightly soft accountant I'd fallen in love with. This man was leaner, harder, with the kind of tan that came from months in the Florida sun. He wore an expensive suit and watch, his hair styled in a way that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. When he saw me approaching, he smiled, that same charming smile that had first caught my attention 3 years ago. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the coldness that had probably always been there, but which I'd been too naive to recognize. "Sophia," he said, as I got close enough to hear. "You look tired." "Hello, David," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "You look prosperous." He laughed, apparently missing or ignoring the barb. "Things have been good. Very good. But I understand you've been struggling." The casual way he said it, like my struggles were just an amusing footnote to his success, ignited a rage I'd been suppressing for 2 years. "Our daughter has been struggling," I corrected him. "Emma. Remember her? Blonde hair, green eyes, your chin?" For just a moment, something that might have been genuine emotion crossed his features. "How is she?" "She's 2 years old, and she's never had a father," I said bluntly. "She's been asking why all the other kids have daddies and she doesn't." David's jaw tightened. "That's not my fault. You knew what you were getting into when you decided to keep the baby." "I knew I was having a child with a man I loved," I shot back. "I didn't know I was having a child with a criminal who would abandon us both the moment things got complicated." "Criminal?" David's laugh was harsh. "Look around you, Sophia. Look at the life I can provide now compared to the life you're living. Who's really the criminal here?" Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted into something more focused, more dangerous. "My associates are getting impatient," he said. "They want to meet you." "What associates?" I asked, though I already knew. "People who can offer you and Emma protection. A new life, away from Chicago, away from all of this." He gestured vaguely at the city around us. "All you have to do is help them with one small problem." "Let me guess," I said. "Luca Marchetti." David's eyes sharpened. "So you do know him. When my people saw you going into his building last night, I wasn't sure if it was coincidence or something more." The admission confirmed everything Luca had suspected. David had been watching me, using me as bait to draw Luca out. The knowledge that he'd been willing to put Emma in danger for his own ends filled me with a fury so pure it was almost cleansing. "I know him," I said carefully. "He's been protecting Emma and me from your Russian friends." "Protecting you?" David's laugh was genuinely amused now. "Sophia, you have no idea what kind of man Marchetti really is. The things he's done, the people he's hurt. He's not protecting you. He's using you, just like everyone else." "Maybe," I admitted, "but at least he's not pretending to love me while he does it." The blow landed hard. David's charming mask slipped, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. "You always were naive," he said. "It's time to grow up." 2 men had appeared at the edges of my vision, moving closer with the same predatory grace I'd learned to recognize. They looked like tourists, but their eyes never stopped scanning for threats, and their hands rested casually near concealed weapons. "Your new friends?" I asked, nodding toward them. "Insurance," David replied. "In case Marchetti decides to make an appearance. He's not coming." I lied. He doesn't care enough about one broke nurse to risk a war over. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Luca was coming. The question was whether his people could get to me before Kozlov's men disappeared me into whatever nightmare they had planned. David's phone buzzed again, and this time when he read the message, his face went pale. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." "Go where?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can talk without interruption." His hand closed around my arm, not gently. "Somewhere your protector can't find you." The men who'd been pretending to be tourists were moving closer now, no longer bothering to maintain their cover. I could see other figures emerging from the crowd. More of Kozlov's people, forming a net around the fountain, but I could also see Vincent, 50 yards away. talking into his sleeve with studied casualness. And there, the flash of pale hair that could only be Luca himself, moving through the crowd with lethal purpose. "David," I said quietly, letting my fear show in my voice, "please. Think about Emma. Whatever you're planning, whatever they've promised you, is it worth putting your daughter in danger?" For a moment, I thought I'd reached him. Something flickered in his eyes, some echo of the man who'd once claimed to love us both. But then his phone rang, and when he answered it, I heard a heavily accented voice speaking rapid Russian on the other end. "Da," David said. "She's here. We'll bring her to the boat." Boat. That wasn't part of Luca's plan. If they got me onto Lake Michigan, away from the city and Luca's network of surveillance and control, I might never be seen again. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said firmly, trying to pull my arm free. David's grip tightened painfully. "You don't have a choice anymore, Sophia. You stopped having choices the moment you got involved with Marchetti." The first shot came from somewhere behind me, the crack echoing off the fountain's stone surfaces. Suddenly, the peaceful afternoon exploded into chaos. Tourists screamed and scattered, parents grabbed their children, joggers dove for cover behind whatever shelter they could find. More shots followed, and I saw one of Kozlov's men spin and fall, blood blooming across his chest. David cursed in a language I didn't recognize and started dragging me toward the lake, where I could now see a speedboat waiting at the dock. But Vincent was there, appearing out of the crowd like an avenging angel, his massive form cutting through the panic with impossible grace. He slammed into the man closest to us with enough force to break bones, then spun toward David with murder in his eyes. "Let her go," Vincent rumbled. David's response was to pull a gun, a small silver thing that looked almost delicate in his hand. He pressed it against my temple, and I felt the cold metal against my skin like a kiss of death. "Back off," David snarled, "or she dies right here." The world seemed to slow down. I could hear my own heartbeat, could smell the fear sweat rolling off David's skin, could feel the tremor in his hand as he held the gun. In the distance, more shots were being fired as Luca's people and Kozlov's soldiers turned Millennium Park into a war zone. But all I could think about was Emma, safe in Isabella's apartment, probably still decorating cookies and laughing at something she found delightful. Whatever happened here, whatever price had to be paid, she would grow up safe. Luca had promised me that, and unlike David, he kept his promises. Sophia. Luca's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stood 20 feet away, his pale eyes locked on mine, ignoring the gun pointed at my head. "You're going to be fine." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he could control this situation, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. "David," I said quietly, not moving despite the gun at my temple. "Look around you. Your Russian friends are dead or dying. This is over. It's not over until I say it's over." David snarled, but I could hear the desperation in his voice now. "Yes," I said, still looking at Luca. "It is." I dropped my weight suddenly, slipping out of David's grip and rolling away from the gun. Vincent moved like lightning, covering the distance between himself and David in 2 massive strides. The gun went off, the shot going wild, and then Vincent had David pinned against the fountain's edge, the weapon spinning away across the concrete. Luca was beside me in seconds, his hands running over me, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," I managed, though I was shaking like a leaf. "I'm okay." Around us, the battle was ending as quickly as it had begun. Kozlov's remaining men were either dead, wounded, or surrendering to Luca's superior numbers. Sirens wailed in the distance, police and ambulances responding to reports of gunfire in the park. "We need to go," Vincent called out. "Now." Luca helped me to my feet, his arm around my waist as we hurried toward the waiting cars. Behind us, I could hear David screaming threats and curses, but his voice was already fading into the distance. "What happens to him?" I asked as we reached the Bentley. "Justice," Luca said simply. "The kind that courts can't provide, but which men like him understand perfectly." 3 hours later, I was back in Isabella's apartment, holding Emma while she showed me the dozen cookies she'd made in my absence. She was so excited, so proud of her creations, that it broke my heart to think how close I'd come to never seeing her again. "Mama sad?" Emma asked, studying my face with those too perceptive green eyes. "No, baby," I said, meaning it for the first time in longer than I could remember. "Mama's happy. Very, very happy." Luca appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an expression I was learning to read, satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. The look of a man who'd won a war, but paid a price for victory. "It's finished," he said quietly. "Kozlov's organization is broken. David won't be bothering anyone anymore." I didn't ask for details. Some things were better left unknown. "And Emma?" I asked. "Is she safe now?" "She's safe," he confirmed. "You both are." Emma looked up at him with curious interest. "Nice man," she announced solemnly. "Nice man helped Mama." Something in Luca's expression softened at her words. "Smart little girl." Later, after Emma had been fed and bathed and tucked into the guest room bed that Isabella had somehow made feel like home, I found myself standing on the apartment's balcony, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked different now, cleaner somehow, less threatening. The war was over, and we had won. "Second thoughts?" Luca asked, joining me at the railing. I thought about his offer from earlier, about the life he could provide for Emma and me, safety, security, luxury beyond anything I'd ever imagined. All I had to do was say yes, and we'd never have to worry about money or danger again. "Ask me again in 6 months," I said finally. "When I'm not running on adrenaline and gratitude." He smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. 6 months it is. As we stood there in the gathering darkness, Emma safe and sleeping inside, I realized that for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Whatever the future held, whatever choices I would eventually make, they would be mine to make freely, and that, more than any amount of money or security, felt like victory. The Rolex was still in my pocket, its weight a reminder of how drastically my life had changed in just 2 days. Tomorrow, I would give it back to him. Tonight, I would simply stand here beside the man who had saved us both, watching the lights of the city twinkle like stars, knowing that my daughter would wake up safe in the morning. For now, that was enough.